Greetings, my name's Rosina Buckland and I'm curator of the Japanese collections in the Department of Asia here at the British Museum. Today I am going to introduce our new Asahi Shimbun display right at the front of the museum, which presents a small group of objects relating to Japan's festival floats. The display has at its center an object discovered during lockdown, and it's supplemented by some other works from the museum's collection. This model of a festival float in the form of a boat set on a wheeled carriage forms the center of this new Asahi Shimbun display, and it's been in the British Museum's collection since 1908, when it was donated by a Japanese art dealership called Yamanaka and Company, and they gave it to mark the Summer Olympics that took place in London that year, in 1908. It measures 122 centimeters wide and across from prow to stern, and on the boat is mounted a cabin for the passengers, decorated with elaborate carving which has been painted in bright colors. And on the poop deck above the rear space are 3 banners flying which bear a family crest. And you can see here some of the details of the carving that decorates that cabin, showing a lion dog at left, a prancing blue lion dog there at the center of that image on the left, a dragon above and a phoenix below in the center that surmount the gables at the front and back, and more lion dogs that are crouching at the corners of the eaves in the right-hand image, little protective figures that will scare off any malevolent forces that might attack. And the interior of the cabin is provided with a rush mat floor, a tatami floor as it's known in Japanese, and the walls are decorated with cherry blossom that you can just see in the main shot, and then a close-up detail on the right. So a highly decorated, ornate, prestigious object. So this is a pandemic story. The float emerged, or my attention was drawn to the float, thanks to the opportunities presented by the pandemic disruption. I returned to work at the British Museum, having been here previously. I returned in April 2020, but I was not able to get into the building for several months. The museum was closed when I did get back, closed to visitors, and life was much quieter than the normal round of talks, meetings, welcoming visiting researchers, creating displays, writing, all the other usual activities. So I was going into the stores and exploring, trying to discover new objects and new avenues of research, and familiarizing myself with the newest building on the museum site, which is the World Conservation and Exhibition Centre in the northwest corner of the site, which houses material which was previously stored off-site. And for this reason, this float model had not come to the attention of previous curators. On the label, it said a Chinese junk, the type of craft that traditionally plied the waters around Chinese coastal ports. But this made me a little bit suspicious, or I was skeptical about this description. As you can see from the photograph on the left, there were many pieces that had become detached, but they'd been carefully retained. And this is a wooden object, and it's fragile in terms of this delicate carving. So little railings and finials and pieces of the bird carvings, etc., had come off. And I felt it was important to have full conservation carried out on this object, and that it would be a fascinating piece to investigate further and to get out on display. And the model sits on a carriage, which you can see in the detail in the right-hand image there, on 4 large wheels. And the rims of these wheels do seem to show evidence that it's been in use. There's some wear to them. And when I looked more closely at the 3 banners, I knew immediately the object was in fact Japanese, albeit that the decoration, this wonderful ornate decoration of animals and foliage, is ultimately derived from China. So it's Chinese style, but it's made in Japan. And that decoration is very typical of shrine architecture in Japan. And the image on the right here shows the banners after they had gone through full conservation. So these are probably the most fragile part of the object, but our textile conservator has very carefully reinforced them so that they can be displayed as was intended on the rear of the boat. There are a number of labels or markings on the boat which became much clearer once it had been moved to the conservation studio in preparation for the display. At left, you can see the beautifully painted museum registration number recording that it came in on the 25th of July, 1908. And in the top right is the label of the company that donated it, Yamanaka and Company, with their address on New Bond Street, that I'll talk about in a moment. And then in the bottom right is an interesting label that when you look very closely, there is a Chinese character at the very top left of the label. And this is the character Ron of Rondon or London, the slightly Japanized pronunciation, Rondon. So this seems to indicate that the boat had been dispatched to London, to the Yamanaka sail room. And I'm going to show you a short video here that takes you through, or is a time-lapse video showing the conservation work that was undertaken by the conservators to clean and prepare the boat. So where did the boat come from? It was donated, as I said, by the company Yamanaka and Company in 1908. This was an antiques dealership that began operations in Osaka in the late 19th century, Osaka in central Japan, trading in artworks that had been dislocated owing to wide-ranging social and economic upheavals that were taking place in Japan from 1860s onwards. And building on their success, their domestic success, the company expanded their business overseas to New York in 1894, to Boston in 1899, and then London in 1900, where they had a branch on New Bond Street, initially at 68, and then they moved subsequently to 127. Specializing in high-priced art and antiquities aimed at wealthy collectors and museums, the business was one among the first firms to make Japanese and Chinese art available in Europe and the United States, helping to popularize the market for all things Asian in the early 20th century. And this is an advertisement from the time. And you can also see the building today survives, but with some modifications that have been made to it. The showroom was illustrated in Apollo magazine in 1912, and this was obviously an attractive, fashionable place for people to go and pick up Asian art pieces to decorate their homes. And interestingly, looking into the history of the company activities at this time, I found this image of a loan exhibition. Yamanaka did loan exhibitions in London. They also apparently did one at Rhode Island School of Design in Providence, Rhode Island, on the east coast of the United States in 1902. And intriguingly, within that display was a boat model. So this was obviously something that they had a number of pieces. They were acquiring them, thinking that they would be of interest to collectors and also institutions in the West. And then, of course, there is the big question of who made the boat. The provenance from Yamanaka was pretty much all I knew about this object, but I wanted to know more about where it had come from and who had made it and for what purpose. And it was only through a process of international collaboration with colleagues in Japan primarily, but also North America, that I was able to gain a better understanding of its meaning and background. I contacted a Japanese colleague, Kuchiki Yuriko, who researches the history of the Yamanaka company, and she was able to speak with a former employee who had very useful information. Thanks to him, we now think it possible that the model was created by an artist called Murakami Tetsudo, who lived from 1867 to 1919. He was a woodworker known for elaborate carving on festival floats, depicting mythological subjects and creatures, figures, foliage, natural foliage, and other decorative motifs. And examples of his work survive in his home area, his hometown of Komatsu, in Ishikawa Prefecture on Japan's north coast, and also in Matsumoto in Nagano Prefecture in the central Japan Alps region. And these are two images of one of his floats for the Fukashi Shrine Festival in Matsumoto. What's interesting about Tetsudo is that he taught successively at two newly founded craft schools in his home region. And these schools were being established as part of an initiative in the late 19th century to modernize Japanese craft practice, to make it suitable for producing objects for sale abroad, to generate revenue, to generate foreign revenue. Japan was modernizing, trying to establish itself on the international stage as an independent nation state. And this was part of the effort that craft could bring in money. And from 1900, Murakami Tetsudo was employed by Yamanaka Company at their factory in Osaka, producing Western-style furniture for export, such as this chair. An upholstered chair with gilded leather or brocade sometimes, and ornamented with Japanese-style carving. So Japonisme was a trend. It takes the French name Japonisme because that was where the fashion originated, taking elements of Japanese art and design, incorporating them into Western style furniture and decorations in the home. And it was seen as elegant and attractive. So these chairs are Western style, but they have ultimately Buddhist-inspired motifs of dragons, phoenixes, chrysanthemums, turtles, and fish. So a quite hybrid form, and you can see some details of the chair here. And this piece was purchased by the Victoria and Albert Museum back in 1992. The firm Yamanaka and Company were intending these objects to be sold abroad in their branches. They were also marketing them through the international exhibitions that were happening at this time in North America and in Europe. And they particularly put a lot of effort into the Louisiana Purchase exhibition that happened in St. Louis in 1904. And they published a lavish catalogue the next year, called the Catalogue of Room Decorations and Artistic Furniture. And these pieces very specifically name check the traditional sources and the Buddhist sources that provided inspiration. So this is an image of the Horyuji sofa that is named for Horyuji Temple, one of the oldest temples in Japan, situated in Ikaruga, near Nara in central Japan, very much a center of Buddhism in ancient Japan. So very interesting hybrid pieces. And it's possible that Tetsudo made the boat as a maquette, a small-scale model of a float to show the commissioners of a festival float what the finished product would look like. It's not necessarily the case that it had anything to do with the factory, but this is the interesting connection that Tetsudo worked for the factory. Tetsudo also made floats, and he brought the two aspects together in these quite unique pieces of furniture. And I'll return to the possibility of it having been a maquette a little later. So what sort of a boat is it? Recent research, and through these contacts with people in Japan, has revealed that the boat takes the form of the state barge, the gozabune in Japanese, the form of marine transport that was used by the rulers, by the shogun primarily, the head of the samurai or military elite government that was based in Edo, today's Tokyo. And if they moved around, it was often easier to move by ship. They had barges of various sizes, and the regional warlords of the samurai class, who were known as daimyo, they also would have had their marine transport or riverine transport. And the crest, the three banners that we saw at the rear of the boat, the crest there is of the ruling Tokugawa house. So the shoguns were successively of the Tokugawa family. This is a detail from a hand scroll, a section from a hand scroll in Tokyo National Museum that catalogues all of the waterborne craft used by the Tokugawa family, including the state barge. It's called the Tenchimaru, this particular boat. And you see that crest with the three hollyhock crests within a circle. They're white on red on the side of the boat. And then we have several works in the British Museum collection that show these high-level or elite-level barges. This is a daimyo or a regional lord's barge on the Sumida River in Edo. Quite an early example from the late 1600s. I should say the previous one was a painting. And then this image on the screen now is a deluxe woodblock print from 1807. So I should explain that there are commercially produced woodblock prints in the early modern period in Japan in the 1700s and 1800s, and there are privately produced woodblock prints, and we'll be seeing both in this presentation, and you can see both in the display. So this is a privately produced one that were put together by poetry groups. And then a very interesting hand scroll painting, an unmounted hand scroll painting, part of the collection that was brought back by William Anderson. He was a British naval surgeon who was in Japan for 7 years in the 1870s, and he put together a remarkable collection of mainstream artists, but also much lesser known artists. A huge range of works and also unmounted works. So this is a really rich treasure trove of painting up to 1880 when he returned from Japan. And this long hand scroll by an artist from the group of painters, the lineage of painters who were in service to the ruling samurai elite, the Kano school, shows a procession of the state barge and supplementary boats. And here you have a detail of one of these boats with a different crest here of a different aristocratic or elite family, and a detail of another one of the procession of boats. So this is something that was happening on the waters around Japan and the rivers. So to give you some more background to festivals in Japan, these have formed a key part of the calendar for centuries, called matsuri in Japanese. They're closely tied to a sense of place and community. In towns and cities across the country, the Shinto shrine situated in each neighborhood has an associated festival. And Shinto is a modern term for ancient beliefs that a divine presence called a kami resides within features of the natural landscape, such as mountains, rivers, and trees. These festivals that celebrate and recognize the kami are celebrated en masse by local people with costumes, dances, singing, and a procession of spectacular floats. And regional pride has developed around certain festivals, which now draw large crowds of tourists. The festivals originated as rituals to pray for an abundant harvest of rice, to give thanks, or to drive away pestilence and other natural disasters. Ultimately, these are prayers for the spiritual and physical well-being of the community. And the festival is a point during the year when normal activities are suspended and people can enter into a state of active communication with those spirits, with the kami. In earlier times in Japan, there was a strong concept of there being two dimensions to life, known as kei and hare. And kei is the ordinary and everyday, whereas hare is the extraordinary, the special. And festivals are clearly the latter, and they provide a space where people can break out of the norm and do something extravagant and different, let their hair down, literally, have a good time and relax, and also build this sense of community. And alongside the serious aspect of giving thanks, propitiating, worshipping the kami, there were plentiful celebratory, playful, and commercial elements that developed around the festivals. And we see some modern day photographs here of a selection. I'll particularly point out the top left there, which is the Gion Festival, which takes place in Kyoto, and we'll be coming back to that one. Some parts of the festival take part in the daytime, some take part at night. So festivals were tied in with the seasonal cycle, having different purposes. There are festivals taking place in Japan, as you can see from this summary taken from an encyclopedia, taking place every month of the year. Broadly speaking, the matsuri in rural villages center on agricultural rites in spring and autumn, and those in cities occur in the summer. And the latter offer a chance to relax and cool off from the intense heat and humidity that's always experienced in Asia during that period, especially in the evening. So you can have a nice relaxing and hopefully cooling time, especially when it's out on the water. And festivals take many different forms, but the current display at the British Museum focuses on the procession. And these often involve the carrying of a portable shrine through the streets or the tugging of huge shrine floats by banks of men. These huge floats are kept in storage for most of the year, and ahead of the Matsuri, they are decorated with flowers, prayer cards, and ornaments, and are blessed, after which point it's believed that the kami reside temporarily within the float. And we have a video here which is also shown in the display to give a sense of what these dynamic processions look and feel like. An important part of the festival is the procession of people on foot. It's not just about the big impressive floats, very much about community participation. And these people on foot are often dancing in formation. And this is very much a point at which the whole community comes together. Men, women, and children can take part. And in the display, the present display within the museum, we use this photograph of the sparrow dance from Sendai, a city in northern Japan. Known as the Suzumi Odori, and a very famous event within the festival in Sendai. And you can see men, women, and children processing in the sunshine, everyone enjoying taking part, lots of smiling faces, and wielding these wonderful fans, which our designers have incorporated into the design of the exhibition, the design of the display. So it really gives a good sense of the atmosphere of these events. And there's a long history of festivals in Japan, and there's also a long history of depicting festivals within artworks, within visual culture. The earliest representation we have in the British Museum's collection of festivals is a set of 4 cryptomeria doors with beautiful depictions of floats from the Gion Matsuri that I pointed out on the slide with the 4 contemporary photographs of festivals. And Gion Matsuri, Gion Festival, is perhaps Japan's most famous event. It takes place in July in Kyoto and originated to ward off a pandemic many, many centuries ago, and has continued ever since and draws domestic tourists and international tourists, and is a huge event. These doors are fascinating evidence of elite interest in and support for the activities of ordinary people in Kyoto back in the 1600s. Traditional residences in Japan had distinct sections to them. They were quite hierarchical, and you entered certain areas depending on your status within the household, the most private areas being the most secluded, the most protected. And these wooden doors, quite heavy wooden doors, about getting on for 6 foot tall, these were used to divide the corridors and to restrict those spaces. And inscriptions inside the frame, these images show them with their black lacquer frames removed during conservation a few years ago, and that revealed inscriptions which indicate they were part of a set created for the residence of the Empress Tofuku Monnin. The residence was called the Nyoin Gosho, within the Imperial Palace grounds in Kyoto. And the Imperial Palace complex still survives in Kyoto, even though the emperor moved to Tokyo in 1869. And they are attributed to a painter in service of that Kano family that I mentioned earlier, is attributed to Kano Atsunobu, and they're datable because of this connection to the Nyoen Gosho to 1674 to 76, a very brief period of time, a very specific period of time. And in Japan, when elite architecture was renewed, when it was decided that a building needed to be updated and renewed, the existing structure was often moved and repurposed, recycled basically, often donated to a temple. So it was a meritorious act to offer a building to a temple so that they could make use of it. And this is what happened with the building where these doors were housed, where these doors were located. The Nyoen Gosho was donated to the temple Shoren-in and then to the temple Rinkyuji. And many of these had imperial connections. Princesses would often be sent to the temples as abbesses, or princes would be the chief abbot of a temple. And so these connections facilitated the donation of the buildings. They ultimately ended up in the imperial villa Shugakuin, which still stands in Kyoto today, and they were sold to the museum in 1958. So we have a good understanding of their background. And the door on the left shows the float known as the Kikusui Hoko, or the chrysanthemum essence float, which is carrying musicians on one side. And then on the other side, it has what's known as the Taishiyama, which has a mannequin, a figure representing the prince Shotoku, who was one of the early supporters of Buddhism. And he is carrying an axe standing next to a mound with a tree on it. So this is a very revered and historic figure within imperial history and within Buddhist history, and he's used as one of the celebratory figures in the festival. And then on the door on the right-hand side of the screen, we have the Hosho Yama, it's called, which has a mannequin representing the samurai, classical samurai Fujiwara no Yasumasa in armor. And then on the other side, my favorite part of this set, my favorite float within the Gion festival is the Toro Yama, which shows a praying mantis sitting on top of an ox cart. So some fabulous and imaginative forms that you can see on these festival floats. By the 1700s, Japan had a highly developed publishing industry, and one of the popular items within a huge range of publications that were available were gazetteers. And we can think of these as the travel guidebooks of their day. We have plentiful travel guidebooks of various forms, multiple forms available to us today, and this has long been the case. People were able to travel to a limited extent. There were always reasons that you could find for travel, and if you could gain a permit, off you went, often on a pilgrimage. And there were armchair travelers as well. So a demand for information about places around Japan. And publishers knew that this was a popular item that could provide information, and they produced many different versions of these. They focused particularly on the major cities, which is Edo, today's Tokyo, and Kyoto and Osaka. So we have here the illustrations of famous places in Kyoto, illustrated by Takahara Sai. And on the left is the typical content of this book, shows you famous shrines, temples, other locations within the capital, gardens that you might want to visit or learn about. But then on the right-hand side, we have a representation of the Gion Festival with one of these tall, elaborately decorated floats, decorated with textiles, being pulled by a troop of men. Woodblock prints were another plentiful product within the publishing industry, depicting both everyday and special events of the cities. Publishers underwrote the enterprise of designing and creating these prints. These weren't generated by the artists. It was very much driven by the publishing houses. And publishers favored series because it encouraged customers to buy more prints. And this is a view of the Gion Festival in Kyoto by the leading pupil of the artist Hiroshige. and he inherited his master's name, so he's known as Hiroshige II. And this is the print representing the province in which Kyoto is situated within a series that shows views across the provinces of Japan. And it's an interesting representation. It's an interesting angle on the festival because we don't see any of the people at ground level. We have an elevated viewpoint where we see the top of the float with the passengers riding inside it, and then cloud banks separate off the distant view of the river and the far mountains. And the festival continues to be a major event in the Kyoto calendar today, and it was represented by artists right through to the 20th century. And this is a lovely example from just after the war, where the festival was being revived in 1946 by the artist Mayakawa Senpan, who we have several examples of in the museum's collection. But again, focusing on these iconic tall Yamahoko floats. And I mentioned deluxe woodblock prints, and we have two more examples here from a collection of 1,500 of these deluxe woodblock prints. They're called Surimono in Japanese. A collection of 1,500 that the museum purchased in 2021, and this collection had been formed over a period of 30 years by an individual based in Kyoto. And unlike the commercial prints, as I mentioned briefly earlier, these were issued by private poetry groups using a subscription model, and they were distributed to members of the group and to their friends. The group would include the poems that they had composed, and you can see these huge number in the left-hand print and then a smaller number on the right-hand print. They include their poems, so the prints are a vehicle for them to have their poetry recorded, and they would commission an artist to provide an accompanying image. And the print on the left by Suzuki Nanrei, well, these are both by Suzuki Nanrei, but the print on the left has this charming, whimsical depiction of two performers dressed as samurai warriors, carrying banners on their backs, just like the one on the boat. One's on the boat. And these form part of the Matsuri procession. And then on the right, we have another little group underneath a parasol. And this is called, it's used, the same word is used in Japanese as float, but we would just call it a processional group. And these performers wear the bright red wigs of a mythical figure called a shoujo, and this is usually translated as drunken sprite. So these are slightly anarchic, disruptive figures that appear and consume huge amounts of sake. So they've got their rather ostentatious red wigs. And then a different kind of book from the gazetteer that we saw. This is a much more individualized vision of the artist Yamamoto Soken. And he was one of the artists who specialized, again, in this kind of whimsical, abbreviated, almost cartoon-like, charming, endearing representation or depiction of figures with lines and quite abbreviated faces, but showing scenes of everyday life, people on the left in the bathhouse, and a little baby on the floor there, so a very ordinary scene. The figures you can see have little marks on their backs. They've been undergoing moxibustion treatment, which is a quite common occurrence when you have the bathhouse scene. And then on the right, people relaxing on one of the platforms that were put out over the riverbed or largely dry riverbed in the summer in Kyoto, relaxing in the cool of the evening, as I described earlier. But then in the same book, we get a wonderful idiosyncratic or unusual close-up view of one of these floats of the Gion Festival. So we can tell from the huge wheels and a little glimpse of the fabric above there, the ornate brocade fabrics, that this is one of the floats hauled by the men tugging on the ropes at left there. And then two of the performers who sort of guide the float or nominally guide the float are standing there with their fans. And one of them has closed his fan, put it in his mouth. And then again, we see these festival performers in the procession dressed as samurai that we saw in the Suzuki Nanrei print. And moving on from Kyoto, we now enter Osaka. And this is a gazetteer that shows or provides illustrations of famous places in Setsu province by the same artist Takahara Sai. And it's for the province where Osaka was located, which was called Setsu. And on the left, we see the special occasion. It's not a festival exactly. It's a special occasion when a ceremonial barge carried ambassadors from the southern Ryukyu Islands up the Yodogawa River to Kyoto, from where they would continue their journey overland to Edo. And these ambassadors would pay their respects to the shogun, often when he acceded to the position. And this Ryukyu procession is a theme that's featured in the museum's Mitsubishi Corporation Japanese galleries. So I'd encourage you to go and look at the beautiful hand scroll we have there. And then on the right is a scene of the river festival in the summer. And then prints by Hokusai on the left and Hiroshige II on the right give us views of the festival that took place on the Yodogawa River in Osaka at night, with boats laden with lanterns. And you can just see those boats in the bottom left of the print by Hokusai have large superstructures of paper lanterns, illuminated paper lanterns. There was also a land-based element to this festival, and this is another Surimono deluxe woodblock print issued for a particular purpose. The text above is an appeal for financial donations from members of the community to build a new festival float. Floats wore out, the wood would fail, they would get a bit tired, they would have to be replaced periodically. And the new festival float will take the form shown in the image. And you can see this print in the display, and it's difficult to see on screen, but in real life you can see that it uses deluxe techniques. There's metallic pigment to suggest the gold decoration on the boat, and it's very sumptuously printed on thick paper. And the text, the content of the text, this message of fundraising, gives us the possibility that the boat in the current display, the actual wooden model of a boat, was perhaps made for similar purposes, as a maquette, as I suggested, or perhaps to encourage donations. And then we move east to the shogun's base, the shogun's city, the city of Edo, which also had its own festivals. And this is the gazetteer for Edo, illustrations of famous places in Edo, published in 1834. And it has a sequence of images for the splendid Sanno Matsuri, one of Edo's 3 major festivals, again, which continues today, which is associated with Hiei Shrine. So you have a more close-up view of the participants on the street there, with one of the massive constructions that's paraded through the streets, and then a farther out view of the crowded cityscape, the crowded streets within the cityscape. And we get a street level view of the excitement and crowds at the festival in Edo, with this image by Katsukawa Shun'ei from 1807. And it shows the excitement, the crowds, the dynamism, and the decorations, and the special quality of these occasions. As I said, the festival continues today, but this atmospheric representation is from 1886 by the very successful and prominent artist Tsukioka Yoshitoshi. This is shown in the display, in the current display. And it's from a series entitled 100 Aspects of the Moon. And this design is entitled The Moon in the Morning Sky of a Festival Day. And again, it's a high-level view like the one we saw by Hiroshige, the second of the Gion Matsuri, showing us the top part of the festival float. Again, an ornate, heavy fabric. This one shows the horse race at the Kamo Shrine in Kyoto. And then there's a mannequin on the top dressed as a no performer. And in the sky, you can see the lingering moon, a silvery disc, again, applied with metallic pigment. And then lastly, for Edo, there's a nice example of a miniature float in this print that's in the display, seen in the earliest, the print that we're featuring, of a young woman. And we know this is a young woman from the long trailing sleeves of her robe. And she's holding a boy, possibly her younger brother or just a family friend. And he's pulling a toy float. in the form of a bridge. And this is a scene from classical history, a battle scene or a scene associated with battle, but it's not actually a fight. This is the warrior Ichirai Hoshi, who is upended. He's doing a handstand over the head of his comrade, Tsutsui Jomyo, and they are competing to be the first to arrive at the Battle of Uji Bridge in 1180. And this was a battle that precipitated or initiated a period of civil wars in Japan in the 1180s. And then one of the most spectacular festivals takes place in Tsushima, a normally quiet and rather unassuming city just to the west of Nagoya in central Japan. But on the last Saturday in July, the city is packed with festival goers for the Tenno Matsuri. And this is one of Japan's 3 major river festivals and has a 500-year history. It's a 2-day event that starts with an evening portion, and you can see that on the left here by the artist Hiroshige, where 5 boats are festooned with lanterns and they sail along the Tenno River within Tsushima. And then the next morning, the boats are redecorated with hand-woven tapestries, and they feature mannequins dressed in elaborate costumes on top. And you can see that on the right by Hiroshige's pupil, Hiroshige II. And in this part of the festival, the morning part, they return the kami spirit back to Tsushima Shrine after a long parade through the city. And so both these prints can be seen in the display. And then just to give you a flavor of what it looks like in real life today, through contemporary photography, we have the nighttime and the morning portions of the festival. If I just go back to the print there, I'd point out that this beautiful depiction by Hiroshige on the left suggests the dusk light as the boats process on the river with smaller craft gathering around them. And then on the far bank, you can just see rows of tea houses where spectators are enjoying refreshments. So this is another cooling off in the evening in summer. And then in the museum collection, we have representations, splendid representations of this Tsushima Tenno Matsuri. This is a pair of screens that were acquired in Japan by that naval surgeon I mentioned earlier, William Anderson. His collection forms the core of our Japanese painting collection, which is the strongest in Europe. And he sold his collection to the museum in 1881. So very early acquisition and absolutely sumptuous representation of the evening part of the festival in the screen that's at the top of the screen, the folding screen that you can see above, and then the morning part with the decorated, textile decorated boats in the lower screen. The morning section screen is on display in the Mitsubishi Corporation Japanese galleries in our current rotation of objects that's on until October. And if I show you some details of the screens, you can see in more clearly what's going on there with the lantern festooned boats in the nighttime section, and then the textile decorated boats in the morning section. And if we zoom in even further, you can get a close-up and understanding of the people that are standing on these boats. So it's very much an opportunity for people from the community. It's an honor to be able to ride on the boats and take part in the festival in that way. And in the Mitsubishi Corporation Japanese galleries, we have a festival theme at the moment, so including the morning section of the Tsushima Tenno Matsuri, and some prints and paintings, including these 2 works. On the left is the artist Harazaime, who's from a lineage working in Kyoto. And this is a floral decoration for a slightly different kind of festival. This is the Boys Festival, which is in 2 days' time, the 5th of the 5th month, where sons within the household were celebrated. And there were displays of armor to wish for strength, and then floral decorations as well. And then on the right, we have the more typical, or the type of festival that we've been talking about in this presentation. that we've been seeing in this presentation of a highly decorated display that's being carried through, a portable display that's being carried through by a group of shrine attendants. We have no specific information about the specific festival that this is associated with, but it's by a painter who was working in the late 1700s, early 1800s in Edo. So I hope you can come along to the Asahi Shimbun display at the front of the museum and then make your way to the back to the Mitsubishi Corporation Japanese galleries and enjoy all of these things. We're coming into spring now, into early summer, so we hope that this will be an appropriate celebratory theme for you to enjoy at the museum. Thank you very much.